The Kavath Drift was the kind of place the galaxy forgot on purpose. No shipping lanes ran through it. No stations marked its edges. No government claimed it. No corporation surveyed it. And no tourist had ever looked at it and thought, yes, that is where I want to spend my time. It was 300,000 kilometers of drifting rock, dead signal, and cold silence. Perfect salvage territory, if you were desperate enough. I was desperate enough. My name is Marcus Vale, former combat medic, 6th Terran Expeditionary. Current occupation, independent salvage operator, which is a polite way of saying, I flew a 40-year-old hauler named Perseverance through places nobody wanted to go and pulled apart things nobody wanted anymore. The ship had 3 working cargo clamps, a fuel recycler that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, and a coffee maker that had stopped producing anything resembling coffee about 6 weeks ago. I had 3 unpaid invoices, 1 functioning sensor array, and exactly enough stubbornness to make all of that irrelevant. I was halfway through scanning the outer debris field when my board lit up. A wreck. Eurethian military class. From the shape of the hull signature. It was sitting dark and cold against a cluster of tumbling rock, stripped of most of its outer plating, engines dead, no emergency beacon running. The kind of ship that looked like it had been hit fast and hit hard. I almost passed it. Wrecks like that were usually stripped clean by whoever did the hitting, and anything left behind was rarely worth the airlock time. But something made me bring the Perseverance around. I told myself it was the sensor ping off the ship's emergency section, a faint metallic density that did not match debris. I told myself it was professional instinct. The truth was simpler. Something in the way that ship sat there, tilted, broken, absolutely silent, reminded me of something I had seen too many times before. Things left behind, people left behind. I had been a medic long enough to know that the most dangerous assumption in any situation was the assumption that everyone who needed help was already dead. I suited up, ran a tether, and went aboard. The interior of the Eurethian warship was a wreck in every sense of the word. Bulkheads had collapsed. Electrical lines hung loose and dark. The crew sections were gone. Not just empty, but gone. Vented to space or stripped out entirely. The main hold was half filled with debris. Whatever had happened here had been violent, fast, and completely one-sided. Whoever did this had not been interested in prisoners. I found the stasis pod in the secondary crew quarter, half buried under a collapsed support beam. It was still sealed. The emergency charge was nearly dead, maybe 4% remaining. The locking mechanism had partially triggered, which was the only reason the pod had not vented along with the rest of the ship. I could see the internal display through the cracked exterior panel. 1 occupant, life signs faint, but present. I got the beam off with a pry bar, a cutting torch, and approximately 20 minutes of language I will not repeat here. Then I cracked the seal manually, the way the emergency training cards had shown me, the same cards I had memorized during a field certification 12 years ago, because I was the kind of person who memorized emergency training cards. The lid hissed open. She was young. That was the first thing I noticed. Eurethians were tall by human standards, and even curled inside the pod she took up most of the interior. Her bioluminescent crest, the feather-like sensory structure that ran from her crown to the base of her neck, was flickering at almost nothing, the pale blue light stuttering and dim. There were 4 wounds across her torso, deep ones. Something with serious force behind it had done that, and whoever had done it had left her for dead. In her right hand, pressed flat against her chest, like she had been holding it even while unconscious, was a rank pin. Eurethian military, senior officer grade. It was not hers. The insignia was wrong for her apparent age, wrong for the placement of her uniform marks, wrong in 6 different ways that told me someone had died to give it to her, or she had taken it from someone who was already gone. Either way, she had held on to it with everything she had. I did not ask questions. I moved. Here is the thing about alien physiology that no one tells you until you are kneeling next to an unconscious member of a species that is definitely not human, watching them lose blood that is the wrong color. With a medical kit built for a human body, you improvise or you watch them die. It is not a complicated choice. It is just a hard one. Eurethians had 3-chambered hearts. Their bone structure was partially crystalline, which meant standard fracture protocols were useless. Their biochemistry reacted badly to several compounds common in human field medicine, including 2 things I would normally reach for first: I knew this because I had a salvaged xenobiology datapad that I had bought at a test station 3 years ago for reasons I could not entirely explain at the time, and which had now become the most valuable thing on my ship. I worked for an hour. Surgical sealant instead of sutures, applied in overlapping layers to account for the density difference in Eurethian skin. A pressure field improvised from cargo netting and 2 electromagnets from the salvage bay, positioned to stabilize the wound sites. A hydration compound I mixed from base components after cross-referencing her species' safe intake list 3 times, because I was not going to accidentally poison someone I had just spent an hour trying to keep alive. I talked to myself while I worked. I always did. It helped me think. She woke up swinging, not metaphorically. She came out of unconsciousness with a speed that I had not accounted for, and her first action was to get her arm free and make a very clear attempt to separate my head from my shoulders. I ducked. Barely. She was weak from blood loss and her crest was still barely glowing, but her survival instinct was fully operational, and I respected that enormously, even as I stepped back and put the medical table between us. She said something in Eurethian that my translator rendered as a threat, involving my ship, my species, and a price she intended to collect. Then she switched to Broken Galactic Common and told me she would not be sold. I told her I was not a traitor. She did not believe me. That was fair. I put a container of water on the table between us and went back to checking her dressing without looking at her directly. That was something I had learned early in field medicine. Sometimes the most effective thing you could do for a frightened person was simply to stop performing and just work. Let the actions speak. She watched me for a long time without moving. Then she drank the water. Her name was Kale Urath, and she told it to me in pieces over the next 2 days, the way someone gives you information when they are not sure yet whether you deserve it. I learned that she was junior intelligence, not combat. I learned that the ship had been carrying something, someone, important, and that what happened to it had not been a pirate attack. I learned that the rank pin she was still gripping, even half-conscious, was evidence of exactly who had ordered the attack and why, and that if she returned to Eurethian space alone, without protection, without a way to broadcast what she knew, the same people who had done this would finish what they started. She was not just a survivor, she was a witness, and someone very powerful wanted her silent. I told her she could stay aboard Perseverance as long as she needed. She looked at me the way people look at things they do not have a category for yet. I was heating ration packs in the galley when the sensors screamed. 3 ships, dropping out of faster-than-light travel, less than 40,000 kilometers out. Eurethian military class, but broadcasting no registry number, no identification, nothing. You do not run dark like that, unless you do not want a record of where you have been. They were not law enforcement. They were not rescue. I knew exactly what they were, and so did Kale, because she appeared in the doorway of the galley 3 seconds later, with her wounded side pressed against the frame, and her eyes completely steady. I told her to get into the reactor housing. There was a maintenance crawl space that would not show on a standard bioscan. She went without argument, which told me she trusted my judgment more than she would have admitted out loud. I opened a channel and gave the 3 ships my most convincing version of a confused, moderately dim salvager who had no idea why anyone official would want to talk to him. I mentioned my invoices. I mentioned my broken coffee maker. I was very boring and very thorough about it. They were not fooled, but I only needed them to hesitate. I had been charging the wrecked Eurethian ship's drive core for 48 hours. Not because I had a plan. Because I was the kind of person who looked at an unstable power source sitting next to me in empty space and thought, that might be useful later. Old habit. The medic's habit. You stabilize everything you can, you secure everything you might need, and you do not throw away tools just because you do not have a use for them yet. I vented the core remotely. The explosion was not large by military standards, but in the sensor environment of the Kaveth drift, a sudden mass of superheated debris and electromagnetic interference was exactly large enough. It scattered across every frequency the 3 ships were using to track me. I had maybe 90 seconds. I jumped. The trajectory calculation was done on the back of a ration wrapper, in handwriting that a professional navigator would have found alarming. The margin for error was the kind that makes engineers develop new fears. The Perseverance shook, like something being shaken very hard by something very strong. And then it was quiet, and we were somewhere else, and the 3 dark ships were not behind us anymore. Kale came out of the reactor housing and stood in the corridor and looked at me for a long time. "Humans," she said, "are completely insane." "Yes," I said, "but right now, we are your kind of insane." Something shifted in her expression. It was not a smile. Irethians did not smile the way humans did, but it was something. A recognition maybe. A decision being made. She showed me the rank pin properly for the first time. She explained what it proved, who it belonged to, what the chain of evidence meant when paired with the ship's destroyed logs, which she had pulled onto a data chip before the attack reached her section. It was not just proof of an assassination, it was proof of a plan to blame humanity for it, to use the attack as a trigger point for restarting a conflict between our two civilizations that had taken 11 years and more lives than I had the stomach to count to bring to a close. She had been carrying this alone, wounded, in a broken stasis pod, in a dead sector, waiting for someone to either finish her or find her. I thought about that for a moment. Then I told her about the broadcast rig I kept in Cargo Bay 2. It was old equipment, purchased at auction, meant for long-range signal work in low connectivity sectors. It had a reach that most people would not expect from something that ugly and second-hand. If we could get close enough to a relay point, it would do what she needed. She looked at the rig, she looked at me. She said, "Why are you doing this?" I had a lot of answers to that question. I had the honest one, which was that I had been a medic for 12 years, and I did not know how to watch something that was fixable become unfixed. I had the practical one, which was that a war between humanity and the Eurethian collective would make my line of work significantly more dangerous. I had the simple one. I gave her the simple one. "Because you held on," I said. "Whatever else happened out there, you held on. That counts for something." She did not respond, but she did not look away either. We reached the relay station at the edge of Thess-controlled space 6 hours later. The hunters found us 8 minutes after that. There were more of them this time, and they had a contact on the station, and the situation in the docking bay was the kind that looks extremely bad from every angle you examine it from. Kale examined it from one angle. She walked to my broadcast rig, pulled up the channel, and transmitted everything. The data chip, the rank pin's registry trace, her own recorded testimony, to Eurethian High Command, on an open frequency, live, before anyone on the other side of that docking bay could do a single thing to stop her. The transmission took 40 seconds. The conspiracy it dismantled had taken years to build. I stood in the doorway and watched 3 very unhappy people decide very quickly that their situation had changed in ways they had not planned for. They left. People in that business always left when the thing they were protecting no longer existed. High Command recalled Kale within the hour. There were people who wanted to speak to me as well, in a formal, diplomatic, please do not leave kind of way. And I spent 2 extremely uncomfortable days explaining my involvement to people who kept using words like unprecedented and irregular. They were not wrong. Kale left without saying goodbye. Eurethians did not do goodbyes, culturally. It was not a slight. It was just who they were. I found the new fuel recycler bolted to my engine bay when I ran pre-launch checks. Brand new, military grade, not a scratch on it. No note, no registration, nothing. Just there, doing its job, perfectly fitted to my ship's connection housing, as though someone had taken the exact measurements beforehand. I sat in the pilot's seat for a moment. Then I ran the gauge. Full tank, everything green. The Perseverance lifted out of the station without complaint, for the first time in longer than I could remember, and I pointed her nose toward the next dead sector on my list and let her run. The galaxy was large and quiet and mostly indifferent to the things that happened inside it, but sometimes, in the places it forgot on purpose, something worth remembering happened anyway. I could live with that.